Have you ever heard your child's voice calling out after they're dead? In the mountains of Pisgah National Forest, a woman who lost her daughter to a flash flood 18 years earlier stepped into a stormy trail and heard something no grieving mother should ever hear again. A child's cry calling out through the rain. But when Dana Holt pushed through the ferns, she didn't find a human. She found a small, injured creature covered in dark, wet fur, with eyes unmistakably human, whispering a broken "ma" as it clung to her. People in the nearby town joked about Bigfoot, but Dana didn't joke when she carried that strange child back to her cabin, healed its broken leg, taught it simple words, and watched it call back to something deep in the forest, something enormous, watching, waiting, and grateful. And what she discovered in the weeks that followed didn't just challenge every myth about the wilderness. It showed her the quiet truth of a bond strong enough to heal a lifetime of grief. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll understand why she protected this creature's family from hunters, why they returned to say goodbye, and why some secrets must stay hidden to stay alive. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from, what your name is, and how far you think this story deserves to travel. To all my dear viewers, thank you for being here. Your presence means more than you know. If you'd like to help build a gentle, curious community of Bigfoot believers, feel free to tap like and subscribe so we can keep exploring these mysteries together. The rain had been falling since dawn, thick and unrelenting. The kind of mountain rain that soaked through bone and memory. It came down in sheets over Pisgah National Forest, hammering the canopy of maple and oak like distant hoofbeats. Dana Harper walked straight into it. No hood, no hat, her gray-streaked hair plastered to her face and neck. The cuffs of her flannel were already dark with water, clinging to her wrists like cold apologies. She didn't mind the wet. She'd chosen this storm, like she chose this trail, like she chose to leave her truck behind and walk the Hollow Branch Trail alone on this particular morning. Not because she forgot the date, but because she never could. May 3rd, the day Lydia would have turned 18. The girl she hadn't seen since she was 8. The girl the river had taken during a flash flood so violent the forest itself had turned its face away. People in Hot Springs meant well. They always did. Thinking of you today, Dana. She was such a bright light. Sending prayers. She hated every word of it. Not because they weren't kind, but because they forced her to acknowledge the wound before she was ready. So she escaped them the only way she knew how. She walked into the trees, into the hush between raindrops, where even grief had to whisper. The trail was a ribbon of mud now, winding through thick undergrowth, dappled with standing water and slick roots. Her boots squelched with every step, but she didn't slow down. The silence between the thunder rolled longer here. The deeper she went, the more the rain seemed to soften, not in volume, but in presence, as if the forest swallowed sound. She knew this part of Pisgah, knew where the path forked, where the red earth turned to rock, where the ferns rose taller than her hips. She had walked it when Lydia was a toddler strapped to her back. She had walked it after the flood, year after year, hoping to find some trace of what had been lost. She never did. Until today. It started like a mistake. A sound under the rain. Too soft. Too odd. She stopped mid-stride. Listened. Nothing but wind through pine and the steady patter of heaven. Then again, a low moan, almost drowned in the rush of falling water. Not a branch cracking, not the grunt of a bear or the whistle of a bird. It came again, a sound so faint, so heartbreakingly human, it rooted her feet to the earth. A trembling whimper, like a child on the edge of breath, wet, weak, but patterned. A sob held in a small body. Her stomach flipped. No logic, just memory. Lydia? No, she thought immediately. Impossible. But still she moved. Forward, off trail, heart thrumming like it did that day beside the river. Her breathing grew tight. The forest thickened. A curtain of ferns rose up before her, slick and shimmering with rain. She parted them slowly, fingers shaking. The ground dipped here, forming a shallow hollow, choked with moss and dark water. She stepped onto a rock, slipped. Her body jolted sideways, one boot skidding on mud. She slammed her palm into the trunk of a tree to steady herself. The exact panic, the helplessness. It mirrored the day she screamed Lydia's name into rushing floodwaters, the day her hand couldn't hold on. She almost turned around, almost ran the other way like she'd done years ago to call for help too late. Then she heard it again. Not just a whimper now. Something shaped like a plea. Broken syllables caught between instinct and language. It didn't say mama, not fully, but it reached for it. It tried. Dana pushed forward. Beneath a mat of wet ferns and rotting leaf, something moved, curled. She crouched. Her breath caught. At first, it looked like a ball of dark fur, soaked through and shaking. Her brain shouted, bear cub, injured, dangerous. She should back away. She should. But then it shifted, turned its face toward her. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything she'd ever seen in the wild or heard about on any ranger radio. The face was wrong. Or maybe too right. Wide brown eyes, human-like and glossy with fear, blinked up at her. The forehead sloped gently, skin wrinkled around the brows like a worried elder. No snout, no animal nose, no teeth bared. Just trembling, wet breath and a swollen leg bent at an angle that made her sick to look at. Dana froze. Every instinct in her chest screamed danger, but something louder pushed through. Compassion, something ancient, maternal, desperate, she whispered, barely audible under the rain. Hey there, it's okay. The creature winced, its small body flinching. It didn't run. Couldn't. The leg was too damaged. The way it clutched its side, the way it blinked slow and deliberate. This was no beast. It had awareness, it had pain, it had a kind of pleading in its gaze that broke through every wall Dana had built over the years. She stood there, paralyzed. What if its parents were nearby? What if they were watching? A massive shadow behind the tree line, ready to tear her in half. The forest had gone quiet again. The rain continued, but no birds, no squirrels, no breath of wind. Just the sense of being watched, studied. She stepped back, one foot, then another. But the moment she turned her shoulder, it called again. That same broken, aching sound. Low, garbled, familiar in the way old dreams are familiar. She stopped, slowly turned around. It was still looking at her, eyes huge, lips moving, mouth trying to shape something more than pain, a whisper that tugged on something buried inside her. Ma? Dinah's knees buckled. She dropped beside the creature, soaked to her bones, hands trembling as she reached into her backpack for the emergency kit she never thought she'd use again. The leg was broken but not compound. No bone sticking out. Just swelling and the angry purple hue of deep bruising. She tore a strip from her undershirt, binding it tightly around a stick she shaped into a splint. The creature moaned once, but didn't strike. Didn't claw. Only gripped her sleeve with fingers, not paws, as if grounding itself through her presence. She covered it with a silver emergency blanket. Its breathing slowed under the warmth. The eyes never left her face. Not once. You're gonna be okay, Dana whispered, more to herself than to it. I've got you. She wrapped the small frame in her arms, startled by its weight. Denser than a child. Muscled. Wild, yet soft. Her back strained under the effort, but she hoisted it up, one strap of her old camping harness still good enough to help distribute the burden. The forest shifted behind her as she turned back toward the trail, toward her cabin. Somewhere behind her, deep in the trees, a shape moved. She didn't see it, but she felt it. A presence, tall and still, half hidden between trunks. Watching. Not advancing, not retreating, Just there, like the ghost of a choice she wasn't ready to name. The rain thickened again. Thunder rolled. She adjusted the weight on her shoulders, one hand steadying the small head pressed against her back. She walked, not fast, not fearless, but forward, and somewhere in the wet hush of Hollow Branch, a line had been crossed, not in violence, but in mercy. One soul carried another. One wound reached for healing through the arms of a woman who once couldn't hold on. She held on now, even if the forest held its breath. Even if something ancient watched from the dark, limping slightly, waiting to see what kind of mother the storm had returned. The rain hadn't let up by the time Dana reached her cabin. It clung to the roof in a steady rhythm, sliding down the slanted tin in waves, pooling at the corners where pine needles gathered like memories too old to sweep away. The trail behind her was a mud-stained ribbon, her boot prints already fading into sludge. On her back, the small body stirred, still burning with fever, still trembling with every dip in the ground, but breathing. That was the only thing that mattered now. Breathing. She paused just before the porch, the old wood slick beneath her boots. The forest behind her was gray and veiled in mist, but she didn't look back. She didn't want to. Not yet. Not while her shoulders still remembered the weight of loss, and now carried something so foreign, so fragile, it didn't even have a name. The door creaked open like it hadn't been touched in years. Her cabin was simple, hand-built by her late husband, warmed by a wood stove that still bore the scorch mark from that one winter she forgot the kettle. It smelled like cedar and ash and old paper. No electricity, no phone. The radio sat on a shelf with a bent antenna, forever tuned to the local AM station, though she rarely turned it on. There were books, most with yellowing pages. Children's books still sat on the lower shelf, Lydia's shelf, the only shelf Dana never dusted. She moved gently, slowly lowering the creature onto the couch. No, onto the old twin mattress she'd dragged out in front of the fireplace years ago, when winter nights made the bedroom feel too far. It lay limp, breath shallow, but there. Rainwater soaked into the wool blanket as she stripped off the damp emergency covering, replacing it with the softest quilt she owned. Mossy brown fur clung in clumps to its body, thick and wild, but beneath it was warmth. Real, living warmth. Dana knelt beside it, listened. The heartbeat was slow, steady, but powerful. Not human. Not a bear's thud either. It echoed in the space between her ribs like a steady drum beat from deep underground. She reached for the kettle, filled it with water from the tin basin, set it on the stove. Flames bloomed orange and lazy from old pine bark, and soon the cabin smelled of smoke and boiled air. The creature didn't stir. She crushed a few berries she'd picked days earlier, wild gooseberries and sour elderberry, and mixed them with a little warm milk and a pinch of salt. She wasn't a vet. She wasn't even a mother anymore. But she knew enough about tending to something small. Something hurt. She spooned the mixture into a tin cup and set it beside the creature's head. At first, nothing. Then it stirred. Slowly, its nose twitched. Not an animal twitch. Not quite. It sniffed. Lifted a hand. Yes, a hand. And reached toward the cup. Fingers curled like a child learning how to hold a pencil. It brought the cup close and sipped, sloppily at first, then in measured, careful laps. Dana watched in silence. The only sound was the occasional pop of a log shifting in the stove. She exhaled for the first time since leaving the woods. Hours passed. Rain drummed. Shadows stretched and shifted across the floor. The creature, she'd need to call it something, couldn't keep thinking it, slept again, curled like a comma under the quilt. Dana sat at the small table by the window, her cup of tea untouched, eyes fixed on the curve of its spine, rising and falling. Mossy. That's what it looked like when she first saw it, tucked in the ferns, covered in wet rags of green and brown. Mossy. The name fit. She said it out loud, soft as breath. Mossy! The creature's eyelids fluttered. Its head turned. "Mossy?" she repeated, slower, clearer. It didn't speak, but it made a sound. Not a mimic, not an echo, but a tone. Low, warbling, almost like a song sung underwater. It tried again. "Oh!" Dana leaned forward, heart aching in ways she didn't expect. "That's right," she whispered. "Mossy." The next day, the rain stopped. Mist lingered like smoke, curling between branches, clinging to the ground. The world outside the cabin was still. Inside, Dana lit the oil lamp instead of the fire and watched Mossy begin to explore. It moved carefully, weight shifting off the injured leg. It used its arms, strong and deliberate, to lift itself. Crawled more like a toddler than an animal. Eyes large, curious. It stopped at her bookshelf, pulled down a cloth-bound copy of Goodnight Moon. Flipped the pages, one by one, as if it knew what reading looked like even if it didn't know the words. Dinah sat nearby, pretending not to stare. It mimicked her movements. When she poured water, it reached for the cup. When she folded a towel, it folded the blanket. Sloppily, sure, but deliberately. Not wild, not random. Intentional. That night, as she wiped its forehead with a cool cloth, she noticed a scar on its arm. Faint, long-healed. It looked like a burn, or maybe the scrape of stone. And just beneath the fur, its skin was tough, almost leathery, but warm. Always warm. She spoke softly as she worked. "My name's Dana." A pause. "You're safe here." Another pause. "This is home." Mossy didn't answer, but its eyes tracked her lips. And when she stopped speaking, it made a sound again. Longer this time. Stretched like a note on an old cello string. The sound faded into the corners of the room, and for a moment, she imagined the trees outside might have listened too. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. 3 short raps. Dana froze mid-step. The only people who ever came out this far were the ones who'd known her a long time. And that list was small. She opened the door slowly, one hand still damp with cloth. Raymond Cole stood on the porch, holding a carton of eggs in one hand and a dripping umbrella in the other. 70 years old, flannel jacket, jeans tucked into his boots, truck idling behind him on the dirt path. He smiled like the sky hadn't just broken open the day before. "Figured you might not want to come into town," he said. "Heard it was a rough storm." Dana nodded. "It was." He stepped forward, eyes scanning her face. "You all right?" "I'm fine." He looked past her, toward the dim glow of the oil lamp. "Fire out?" "Just letting it rest." Raymond raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He held out the eggs. "Fresh this morning. My girls are finally laying again." She took them. "Thanks." He didn't leave right away. He never did. Dana stepped out onto the porch with him, closing the door just enough so Mossy's form, curled and sleeping on the couch, was hidden. Raymond leaned against the railing. "You hear anything last night?" "Just the storm." He rubbed his chin. "Saw some mighty big tracks not far from here. Hollow branch. Big splay. Could be a bear, but I don't know. Something felt different. Bobby's been sniffing around. Says he saw something. Wants to bring a couple fellas out this weekend." Dinah kept her eyes on the tree line. "Storm scatters scent. Bears wander." "Sure they do," he said. "Still, be careful." She nodded, and he pushed off from the railing, headed down the steps. At the bottom, he paused, turned. "Something strange has been going on out here. Just don't let Bobby get to you." Dana met his gaze. "I won't." He held her eyes a beat too long, then tipped his cap and walked back to the truck. When the engine faded down the road, Dana stepped back inside. Mossy was sitting up, not panicked, just watching the door, as if it knew, as if it heard every word. That evening, she lit a single lamp, moved quietly. She was wiping the stove when she heard the creak of the floorboards. Mossy had moved again, this time just a few inches, dragging itself across the floor in slow, pained pulls. It had made it to the window, and just as she stepped toward it, the floorboard under the window creaked too. She looked down, not at Mossy, but at the sliver of movement behind the curtain. Raymond had been wrong. Bobby wasn't coming this weekend. He'd already been. Mossy froze, eyes locked on her. The silence between them wasn't fear. It was recognition, instinct, shared. Dana stepped back from the curtain, slowly lowered it. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Neither did Mossy. The forest was no longer a place that only took. It had begun to watch, to listen, to reach back. And behind every tree, between every shadow, something else had started to stir. Not just the mystery of what Mossy was, but the danger of what humans might do when they caught wind of it. The cabin held its breath, and outside, the trees stood still, waiting. Morning broke slow and pale through the canopy, light spilling like smoke through the fog that curled along the forest floor. The air outside the cabin still held the scent of damp wood and pine sap, but the rain had stopped sometime in the night. Inside, everything remained still, quiet as a held breath. Dana sat at the edge of the armchair, wrapped in her old wool cardigan, a cup of lukewarm tea in her hands, forgotten. Across the room, Mossy stirred. The creature no longer flinched at every movement. The fever had broken. Its eyes tracked her now, not fearfully, not wildly, but with something measured, something almost thoughtful. Dana noticed it first when she caught it watching her fold laundry the morning after Raymond had come. The way it tilted its head, the subtle narrowing of its brow, the way its fingers twitched when she smoothed a blanket's edge. It was observing, not idly, with purpose. Later, when she picked up the metal cup, Mossy reached out, clumsy but precise. It tried to hold it the same way. It mimicked the wrist, the tilt, the pace of her sip, dropped half of the liquid on its fur, made a low chuff of annoyance, then tried again. That second time, it got most of it into its mouth. Dana didn't say a word, just nodded, and Mossy let out a soft, pleased grunt, like a cat purring, but more hollow, more human in its rhythm. The days that followed unfolded like a slow song, the kind you hum under your breath when no one else is around. Mossy began to move more, dragging itself across the floor with both arms and its good leg, sniffing at shelves, knocking over tin cups, lifting pillows, tapping at the glass windows with a sense of ritual, as if each pane might open into another world. Dana let it explore, watched the way it would pause at certain textures, worn leather, smooth ceramic, the brittle pages of a children's book left under the table since the year Lydia was 5. Dana found herself speaking aloud more, not in full conversation, but in pieces, fragments. Fire! She'd say it while stoking the stove. Water, while pouring from the kettle. Home, while standing in the doorway at dusk, hand resting on the wood frame, watching deer step like ghosts through the clearing. Each time Mossy listened, then echoed, not perfectly, but in tones. Long, breathy syllables stretched and shaped by something closer to music than speech. She said Dana. Mossy answered with a soft whirling sound that ended in a quiet hum, like wind through pine needles. She said Mossy, and the creature touched its chest once, then made a rising, falling cooing sound, then repeated it. Slowly, with care, it was trying, not just to mimic, to communicate. On the third afternoon, Dana found it crouched by the bookshelf. Its legs still weak, but it could push itself upright for brief moments, leaning its weight on the arm of the chair. In front of it lay a curious arrangement, half a dozen small items pulled from around the cabin. A cracked acorn shell, 2 smooth river stones, a piece of bark curled into a half moon, a pine needle, and a dried red berry. They weren't scattered. They were placed, deliberate. The pattern made no sense at first, but the moment Dana leaned in, Something tightened in her chest. She'd seen this before. Not here, not in her cabin, but years ago, deep in Hollow Branch Valley, where she once got turned around during a hike and ended up in a clearing she couldn't find again. The trees there had strange scars, not scratches, not from animals, symbols, etchings. One had been a swirl of overlapping rings, another a line curved around a dot. She dismissed it back then, assumed it was kids or maybe a ranger marking trail experiments. But seeing it now, recreated with such quiet care, with berry and bark and stone, she wasn't so sure. She crouched beside the arrangement. "You made this?" Mossy tilted its head, lifted the pine needle and placed it gently to the side, then pointed at Dinah, then at its own chest, then tapped the center of the largest stone. She didn't know what it meant, but she felt it. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing that little altar of objects, the gentle way Mossy touched each piece, like it held memory, the way it stared at the firelight, eyes shimmering gold in the dark, humming to itself in those long, mournful tones, the way it sometimes stopped mid-meal, staring at the woods through the window, before letting out a quiet series of calls, soft, rhythmic, like a song without words. At first, Dana had thought it was instinct, like a wolf howling, like any wounded animal calling for its kin. But the rhythm of it didn't repeat. It shifted. It changed with the hour, with the wind. It answered the silence in the room like a cello playing against a storm. And sometimes, far off in the trees, something answered back. Not an echo, not the wind. A second voice, similar but deeper, fainter. Dinah tried to convince herself it was coincidence, but her hands trembled when she washed the dishes the next morning. That evening, it happened again. Mossy had taken to sitting near the window once the light began to fade. Legs tucked under, good arm resting on the sill, eyes fixed on the tree line. Dana didn't interrupt. She sat at the stove, turning the pages of an old novel without reading a word. Then Mossy began to sing, not with a tune, with sound. A pattern, soft, high to low, then silence, then again. Higher this time, like asking, like calling. Dana didn't breathe. Then from the woods, a reply. 3 notes, spaced differently, lower, slower. Mossy blinked, sat up straighter. Dana stood. The space between them stretched. The cabin no longer felt like a safe box hidden from the world. It felt like a stage between 2 wilds, one with walls, one with branches. That night she found Mossy rearranging its little objects again. Only this time, the pattern had changed. There were now 3 circles made of small pebbles, all touching. In the center, a feather she hadn't seen before, gray and tipped in black. It was laid across a strip of cloth Dana recognized, one of her old dish rags torn in half, folded like an offering. She crouched again. Mossy tapped each circle in turn, then the feather, then tapped its own chest, then hers, then the middle of the floor. No words, no signs she understood, but it meant something. That night, Dana dreamed of the river again. Not the flood, not the moment Lydia slipped, but the dream from the year after, when she stood in the water and felt something moving beneath the surface. Something large, ancient, watching. She didn't run in the dream. She waded deeper. And when she reached the middle, a hand, too large to be human, rose from the water, holding a small object. A stone with a circle etched into it. She woke before she could touch it. The cabin was cold. The fire had died down to a low glow. Mossy was asleep, curled tightly on the mattress, but one arm stretched toward the doorway, palm open, as if reaching. 2 days later, Dana caught Mossy watching her cry. It wasn't loud. Just a moment in the kitchen. She'd cut her thumb on the corner of the spice tin, and the blood wasn't deep, but the pain sent a jolt through her body. A reminder of what it felt like to lose control. And suddenly, she was back in the river again, screaming Lydia's name into a sky that didn't care. Her knees hit the floor before the tears did. Mossy didn't move at first, but a minute later, Dana felt something touch her shoulder. Not rough, not cautious, just present. She turned her head. Mossy knelt beside her, eyes wide, not blinking. It lifted a hand, placed it gently on her chest, then tapped its own, then just stayed there. No sound, no movement, just being with her in the ache. Dana reached out, fingers trembling, and touched its hand. The warmth there, solid, grounding, alive, burned through the sorrow like a beam of morning light slipping through a crack in the wall. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone in it. Mossy didn't need to speak. It had learned something deeper, and in the quiet, wordless dark of that little cabin, Dana finally understood what it had been trying to say all along. The forest wasn't just full of shadows. It was listening. It was speaking. And some things didn't need language to be heard. The storm had passed 2 nights ago, but the earth hadn't yet forgiven it. Everything still felt waterlogged and heavy, the dirt too soft beneath your feet, the trees leaning just slightly, like they were tired from holding their ground. Dana woke to a silence that didn't comfort, the kind that pressed against the cabin walls instead of lifting away. She moved slow that morning, her knees aching with the cold. The fire in the stove had died to embers, and her fingers felt stiff just holding the kettle. Mossy was curled on the couch, breathing steady, one arm hanging off the side, the other tucked under its head like it had always belonged there. Dana didn't want to wake it. She didn't know if she even could, not if it was dreaming. When she opened the front door to get wood, she almost didn't notice it. Her hand had just reached for the axe when her eyes caught something in the ground. Not just one print, dozens. They surrounded the cabin like a quiet procession that had come in the night and left without a sound. She stepped closer, breath catching. The footprints were massive, longer than her own boots by half, toes spread wide, deep into the wet soil. Too big to be human, too regular to be bare. They circled the cabin in a wide ring. Not randomly, not like something pacing in hunger or anger. They stopped short of the porch, all of them, like there was an invisible line no one dared to cross. Dana's heart thudded. She turned slowly, following the prints with her eyes. Whoever, whatever, had come through here hadn't tried to break in, hadn't even touched the door. They had come to see, to watch, to make their presence known. She backed up to the porch, stepping carefully, not wanting to destroy what had been left behind. There, on the top step, lay something that hadn't been there the night before. It was a bundle, a small cluster of wild berries. Mountain huckleberry, hawthorn, and what looked like chokecherry, tied together with a strip of peeled bark. Beneath them, tucked carefully like a bowl, was a curved piece of nutshell, thick and dark, and worn smooth by time. Dana stared at it. It wasn't an accident. This wasn't dropped. It was placed. When she brought it inside, Mossy sat up immediately, its eyes locked on the bundle. A low sound rose in its throat, one Dana hadn't heard before, a kind of murmur, half joy, half ache. It reached for the fruit with both hands, cradled it, sniffed, then pulled the bundle close like it recognized the scent of home. Dana didn't speak. Didn't need to. The way Mossy rocked slightly, eyes half closed, arms tight around the berries. She understood. Someone had left them here, not just to watch, to reach out, to show. We know where our child is. That night, Dana couldn't sleep. She sat at the table long after Mossy drifted off, her hands wrapped around a cup that had gone cold hours ago. The forest outside the window had never looked more alive, not in movement, but in presence, like it had lungs, like it was exhaling. When the knock came the next afternoon, she jumped. It was too early for Raymond, too far out for hikers. She peeked through the curtain just as the voice followed. "Miss Harper?" It was Bobby Klein. He was younger than she remembered. Late 30s maybe, broad-shouldered, with that wired energy of a man who loved adrenaline more than answers. He stood next to his truck, holding something wrapped in cloth. Dana opened the door just enough to show her face. "Didn't mean to spook you," he grinned. "Raymond said you live out this way. Figured I'd drop in." Her eyes dropped to the cloth in his hands. He unwrapped it without waiting. Inside, a single hair, long, dark, coarse, curled against the fabric. "Picked this up near Hollow Branch," he said, proud. "Biggest print I've seen since that bear last fall. But this ain't bear." Dana didn't blink. "Could be elk, or a stray dog." He shook his head. "I know tracks. I know fur. And this is something else." Behind her, Mossy shifted on the couch. Dana stepped out and pulled the door mostly shut behind her. "Don't have much time," she said. "Got soup on." Bobby didn't seem offended. He looked past her shoulder anyway. "You seen anything strange up this way?" She tilted her head. "What counts as strange in these woods?" He laughed. "Fair point. But Raymond said he found tracks up near his shed. Said they spooked his dog." Dana didn't respond. He squinted at her. "You sure you haven't heard anything? Big? Heavy?" "Nothing but squirrels," she lied. From inside, something creaked. Dana held her breath. Bobby's eyes flicked toward the door. "Got a dog in there?" "Used to, died last winter. Silence stretched too long." She didn't break it. Finally, Bobby wrapped the hair back in the cloth and tucked it into his jacket. "Well, if you see anything, just saying, there's folks who'd pay good money to know what's living up in these hills." Dana nodded once, then closed the door. Inside, Mossy was crouched low beneath the table, breath shallow, limbs coiled like it was ready to spring or vanish. Dana knelt beside it. "It's all right," she said. "He's gone." Mossy looked at her, eyes wide and wet. That night, they didn't light a fire. Too risky. Dana lit the oil lamp instead, turned it low, and sat beside the window while Mossy curled into the shadows. They didn't speak, but they didn't have to. She couldn't stop thinking about the bundle on the porch, the circle of prints, the way Mossy's body had trembled when Bobby's boots scraped against the porch boards. Something was closing in. The next morning, the air had turned sharper, cooler, the kind of morning that hinted at the coming of summer storms. Dana stepped out to check the sky, and her foot caught on something near the wall of the cabin. She looked down. A tree had fallen. Not a massive one. A cedar, maybe 30 feet tall, old, hollow at the base. It had cracked near the roots and collapsed across the moss near her shed, not quite hitting the structure, but close enough to shake the windows. That's when she saw it. Etched into the bark near the break, just above where her boot had scuffed the trunk, was a symbol, a curve around a dot, the same shape Mossy had laid out with stones days earlier. It hadn't been made by a tool, not a knife, something broader, maybe a finger, maybe a nail, and it hadn't been there before. She crouched beside it, touched the edge with her thumb. The bark was still fresh, damp. Whoever marked it had done so before the tree came down, or had marked it to fall. The weight of that thought settled in her chest like stone. This wasn't just a visitor leaving gifts. It was a boundary, a warning, a sign that something was watching closely. Close enough to send messages not through speech, but through nature itself. That night, when the wind picked up and branches scraped against the side of the cabin, Dana sat on the floor beside the couch, her back pressed to the wall. Mossy curled beside her. She didn't move when its hand reached for hers. Just let it happen. Let the warmth of it pass between them. In the stillness, she whispered one thing. "They're close." Mossy nodded, and in its eyes, she saw something new. Not fear, recognition, as if it already knew how this would end. But for now, they had this night. This silence, this breath between storms, and neither of them wanted to let go just yet. The summer heat came in heavy that week, thick as syrup and twice as slow. By midday, the trees held their breath, and even the flies moved lazy in the shade. Dana walked the trail with Mossy strapped to her back in a makeshift sling fashioned from old tent canvas and rope. The fabric dug into her shoulders, but she didn't complain. Not once. Mossy was heavier now, more alert, more solid. He clung to her not in pain, but with the quiet understanding of something that remembered the way back. His eyes scanned the woods with a nervous reverence, as though each bend in the trail held memory. They hadn't come this way since the first rain, not since she'd pulled him out of the ferns. But today wasn't for nostalgia. Today, Dana had come to see something that had been bothering her for days. And Mossy had led her here. With little grunts, small gestures, his fingers pressing against her back every time the trail bent away from Hollow Branch. He hadn't spoken, not in words, but his direction was unmistakable. Half a mile in, she saw the first flash of orange. A strip of survey tape hung from a hickory tree like a warning flag. Bright against the green, it fluttered in the hot breeze, twisting slowly like it was trying to make up its mind. Dana stopped. Mossy shifted behind her. His breath changed. Not fast, just tighter, like he was bracing. She reached up and touched the ribbon. Nylon, fresh, no fray. It hadn't been here 2 weeks ago. Behind her, Mossy let out a low, vibrating sound. Not fear, not quite. Something closer to discomfort. Agitation. He reached a hand around and tore the ribbon from the branch, bunched it in his fist, and squeezed. Then, with a sudden twist, he flung it into the underbrush. His small chest rose and fell. His eyes didn't blink. Dana had seen children react that way, not to fear, but to betrayal. A few steps later, she found another ribbon. Then 3 more. They wrapped trees in irregular intervals, spiraling into the deeper woods, always pointing west, toward the hollow, toward whatever untouched land some logging crew thought they could claim. She reached out, yanked one down, crumpled it into her pack. Then, without thinking, she veered off the marked path and walked straight through the bracken. She didn't remove all the ribbons, just enough to confuse. The deeper they went, the quieter it got. Cicadas still buzzed in the distance, but the usual bird song dulled like it had been soaked in cloth. Mossy's grip on her back loosened, and his hand reached out toward a mossy log, then to a tree trunk, then finally pointed ahead, index finger shaking. Dana followed his lead. The land dipped slowly, a soft roll into a place that felt heavier with each step. The canopy thickened. Air turned sweet with damp stone and decaying fern. And then, all at once, the trees opened. A thung lung. A shallow valley, shielded on 3 sides by steep slopes, overgrown with tangled laurel and vine, green upon green. In the center, a flat stone covered in moss. Along the edges, tree trunks bore marks, lines carved deliberately, not by claws or wind. Dana stopped walking. She recognized them. 3 overlapping circles, a curved shape embracing a single dot, the exact forms Mossy had once arranged from seed and pebble on her living room floor. He slid off her back before she could say a word, limped forward on his still recovering leg, and approached the stone altar. The moss didn't bother him. He dropped to one knee, reached forward, and pressed his hand, flat and slow, onto the stone, right beside a darkened patch that looked like it had once been soaked in resin or sap. A handprint, older, larger. Next to it, pressed into the dried sap, was a second, smaller mark, child-sized. Mossy laid his hand directly over the smaller print and closed his eyes. Dana felt something crack in her chest. It was a shrine. No, a grave. A memory. A place of meaning. The kind of place built by hands, not instinct. And that's when the air changed again. A low wind moved through the valley. Not loud, just steady, enough to rustle the tallest branches. Birds went quiet. Even the buzzing faded. Dana turned her head and saw him. At the edge of the clearing, half hidden behind a leaning pine, stood a figure nearly twice her height. Covered in deep brown fur, matted in places, smooth in others. Not stooped, not snarling, just there, watching. The face was an animal, not in the way she'd feared. It was wide, solemn, brow heavy, eyes sunken but alive, dark and knowing and old. A scar ran down the creature's left thigh, jagged, twisting, partially healed. Lopsided patches of fur grew over it like moss over broken rock. Mossy let out a soft chuff, a string of low syllables, rising and falling like waves. The figure stepped forward, one pace, then another. Not rushing, not threatening, just approaching. Donna felt her hand hover near her belt, where her folding knife usually clipped. But she didn't reach for it. She didn't even fully breathe. The creature stopped at the far edge of the flat stone, 5 feet from her. Close enough to touch, close enough to strike. It didn't. Instead, it raised one hand and pressed its palm gently against its chest. Then it lifted that same hand and pointed, not at Mossy, but at the woods behind it, toward the deeper wild. Then it looked at Dana, held her gaze, and said nothing. But she heard it anyway. He belongs home. He belongs to us. Thank you. Now let him go. Dinah didn't move. Not at first. Her heart pounded too loudly to think. But her eyes drifted back to Mossy, who had stepped away from the altar and was looking back at both of them. His eyes shined. Not with panic, but with understanding. She didn't know what had kept his family away before. But then her eyes dropped again to the scar on the adult's leg. The angle. The fresh way the fur grew around it. She looked back at Mossy's healing limp. They had all been caught in it. Whatever storm, whatever landslide, whatever flash of nature had torn this child from his parents, it had wounded them all, not just one. Dana exhaled, a long, uneven breath. This had never been about her. She was never meant to keep him, only to carry him this far. The big one stepped back. No sound, just one step. Then another. It didn't turn. It simply receded, like fog. Mossy turned to her. He didn't run. He didn't beg. He just watched, waiting to see what she'd do next. Dana knelt, hands shaking. She reached into her pack and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside, a handful of berries, some soft roots she'd boiled and dried, and a folded handkerchief. It was faded pink, edges frayed. The name Lydia stitched into one corner in a crooked childhood scrawl. The one Lydia used to bring on camping trips. The one Dana could never bring herself to throw out. She folded it again, tighter this time, and tucked it into the bundle, then held it out to Mossy. His fingers took it gently. He didn't look inside, just nodded once. Dana stood, and for the first time in a long time, her back didn't ache under the weight of grief. Because this time, she was walking back without losing someone. This time, she was letting go the right way. Behind her, Mossy turned toward the tree line, and in the hush of the valley, the forest closed in around them like a curtain readying for its final act, waiting to see if the human would return alone. Or not at all. The sky was already graying by morning, heavy with the kind of low-hanging clouds that promised another long Appalachian rain. The kind that never asked permission, just settled in and stayed a while. Dana stood on the cabin porch, hands tucked deep into the sleeves of her cardigan, her eyes tracing the edge of the tree line like it might suddenly decide to move. She hadn't said it out loud yet, but today was the day. The kind of day that didn't wait for courage. Inside, Mossy sat near the stove. The blanket she'd wrapped around him now crumpled at his side. His leg had mended. The limp was faint now, just a hitch in his stride when he stood too fast. But he didn't move around the way he used to. Not in circles, not aimlessly. He stayed close, watched her more, like he knew. Dana reached for the drawer in the corner, the one she hadn't opened in years. Inside was a small cloth pouch, sun-faded blue, stitched with stars, the drawstring still intact. It had once held Lydia's adventure treasures, feathers, bottle caps, dried pine cones, and a tiny plastic dinosaur she refused to leave behind even on hikes. Dana emptied it gently, wiped the inside clean with a dish towel, and began to fill it again. She packed the berries first. The soft roots Mossy liked. a twist of dried vine he often rolled between his fingers while humming. Then, without letting her hand hesitate, she folded the pink handkerchief, the one Lydia carried everywhere as a child, and placed it on top. Mossy watched her from across the room. His eyes didn't blink. His body didn't sway. She could feel him reading her through the air itself. Dana drew in a breath. "Today," she said softly, her voice not quite steady, "we go home." Not hers. His. She knelt in front of him and reached out to untie the cloth sling she'd kept beside the door. He stepped forward without being asked, climbed onto her back like he'd done that first storm-soaked night, only now heavier, stronger, his long arms wrapping gently around her neck. The weight of him didn't hurt. Not this time. She stepped off the porch into the damp wind. The trail back to Hollow Branch was steeper than she remembered. Or maybe her legs were just slower this morning. The earth squished under her boots, pine needles sticking to the leather with every step. She didn't follow the marked trail. Not anymore. She followed the one she knew by heart, the one she'd taken to the place with the altar stone and the moss-covered prints. The place where the forest no longer asked for secrets, only for grace. Mossy was quiet the whole way. Only once did he speak. Halfway up the ridge, just past the leaning cedar, he let out a soft sound. 3 notes descending. A call. A farewell. Or maybe both. Dana answered with silence. She didn't know the words. Only the ache in her throat. When they reached the clearing, the wind was waiting. The grass swayed low and steady, like someone breathing just beneath the surface. Dana stepped to the middle, just before the flat rock where Mossy had once laid his hand. She knelt slowly, her knees pressing into the damp soil, and let him slide off her back. He stood on his own now. No sling, no limp. He faced the trees, but he didn't walk. Not yet. Dana opened the cloth pouch, held it out. Mossy took it in both hands, cradled it, then looked at her, eyes wide and filled with something no language could hold. She didn't try to explain, didn't whisper promises or prayers. She just reached out, touched his cheek, and then, in the softest gesture, he reached up and mirrored her. One hand pressed gently to her chest, then to his own. Dana felt her heart skip. It wasn't mimicry, it was memory. Shared. He turned and walked, not fast, not hesitant. He crossed the clearing like he belonged to it. Just before he reached the trees, another shape emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, covered in shadow and wind. The adult Bigfoot stepped into view with a stillness that made the trees lean in. His face was the same, weathered, deep-set eyes. No snarl, no threat. Only gravity. The kind that bends time. He didn't look at Dana at first. He looked at Mossy. Mossy stopped 3 steps away. The adult knelt, slowly, one hand resting on his knee, and waited. Mossy moved forward, tucked himself into the curve of the bigger body, and for a long moment, the forest held nothing but breath. Then the adult lifted his head, met Dana's gaze, and stepped forward, just close enough. Then, without sound, he knelt again, this time at the edge of the clearing, and set something at her feet. A curved piece of bark, carved with a symbol Mossy had made over and over again. 3 circles, a dot in the middle. Family. Dana didn't reach for it. She just stared. She didn't need to take it with her. She understood. It was acknowledgement. It was thanks. And it was goodbye. When she finally turned to go, the rain began. Soft, then stronger. Just like the first time. She didn't run. She didn't look back. But as she made her way down the slope, boots sinking into the wet earth, she heard a sound behind her. Not words, not music, just a call. Like a child's voice. Roughened, changed, but familiar. Da. She stopped, for half a breath. Then another, but didn't turn. The rain fell harder now, and she walked into it, face up, eyes closed, like someone who had finally stopped trying to change the ending. The trail narrowed, then widened, and somewhere down the mountain, where the trees gave way to meadow and the sky opened like a wound trying to heal, she saw the cabin again. lit by the faintest amber glow from its stovepipe. Still standing, still hers, but emptier now, lighter, not from loss, from letting go. And just before she stepped inside, she caught sight of something down the road. Boot prints, deep ones, pressed fresh into the mud, headed in the direction she'd just come from. She didn't move, not yet, not with the door open and the night coming, because she knew not everyone believed in mercy, and the forest wasn't the only thing watching. The rain had stopped, but the quiet it left behind was heavier than the storm itself. Dinah sat on the porch in the gray light of early morning, a wool blanket around her shoulders, steam rising from the chipped mug in her hand. She hadn't slept. Not really. Every creak of the cabin walls, every rustle of leaves outside had drawn her back to the moment on the trail, the weight of Mossy's hand against her chest, the bark token left at her feet, the call, faint, broken, echoing her name. And then, the boot prints. They hadn't been hers. She hadn't heard them approach. But someone had been there, walking the same trail. Not a creature. Not one of the quiet giants that moved like dusk. These steps were impatient. Human. Hunting. She hadn't told anyone what happened in the hollow. No one would have believed her. Not the part about Mossy. Not the altar. Not the eyes that watched her go without anger, without fear. But Dana had always known that belief wasn't the problem. Curiosity was. It started at the diner 2 days later. The same old place in Hot Springs, just past the post office, where folks sat with their backs to the windows and their stories pointed outward like rifles. Bobby Klein had taken up a booth by the window, one boot resting sideways on the seat opposite, like he owned the whole damn county. His voice wasn't loud, but he didn't need volume. He had stories, and he had something else now, something better than a fishtail or a blurry photo. "Ain't no bear," he said, holding up a crumpled Polaroid for the waitress to see. "Not with tracks like that." Raymond was sitting at the far end of the counter, nursing a coffee, listening, not speaking. His jaw was locked. That's how Dana knew he already knew. "I saw it again near Hollow Branch," Bobby went on, eyes gleaming like a boy with a firecracker. "Swear to God it looked right at me. Thing was 9 feet tall if it was an inch, covered in fur, black with streaks of brown. Not a gorilla, not a man." He paused for effect. Folks leaned in, something in between. The waitress made a polite sound, tried to laugh, but Bobby wasn't joking, not even close. And the worst part, he wasn't just talking for himself anymore. Someone else at the table leaned forward, pulled out a recording device, the kind you don't buy unless you're chasing a payday. "Y'all ever hear the Pine Mountains sound?" the man said. "Sasquatch howl, 1973, same rhythm. This one matches it. We ran it through spectrograph software back in Asheville. Got a spike right where the second call hit." Dana wasn't there, but by sunset the story had made its way back up the ridge. And by nightfall, someone had been on her porch. She knew because the door wasn't shut right. She always latched it, always. Inside, nothing was missing. Not the silverware, not the radio, not the books or the old camera she never used. Just one thing. The bark token. It had been on the shelf near the stove, placed carefully, like an offering. Now it was gone. And on the floor below it, a muddy print. Not boot tread, smooth-bottomed, likely socks or bare feet. Someone who didn't want to be heard. Dana stood in the middle of the cabin, arms at her sides, eyes closed, willing her breath to stay slow. Whoever came didn't want her to know they'd been here. They weren't after valuables. They were after proof. The next morning a knock came before noon. When Dana opened the door, she found Riley standing on the steps, arms wrapped around a small tin wrapped in cloth. Her cheeks were red. Her coat was crooked, but her eyes held that kind of brightness that didn't fade with weather. "Mom said to bring you peach biscuits," she said, holding the tin up like a trophy. Dana smiled and stepped aside. "Well, tell your mom she just saved my whole day." Riley hesitated on the porch. "Can I sit for a second?" Dana nodded, cleared the rocking chair, and let the girl climb up. They sat in silence for a minute. the wind brushing through the bare trees beyond the clearing. Then Riley spoke, soft, like someone letting go of something they weren't supposed to carry. "I saw him again." Dana turned slow. "Who?" she asked. Riley looked down, picked at a thread on her mitten. "The man, in the woods, but not like a man. He was covered in fur, big, real big." Dana stayed still. The porch groaned once beneath them. "He was by the bus stop," Riley went on. "Not close, just standing where the hill drops. I didn't tell Mom. She'd say I was making it up." "Did he scare you?" Dana asked. Riley shook her head. "No, he just stood there, watching the road. I thought—" He looked sad. Dana felt her heart twist. She placed a hand gently over Riley's. "Thank you for telling me." The girl nodded, like some secret burden had just passed from her to someone strong enough to carry it. When Riley left, Dana didn't go inside. She sat for hours, watching the trees, wondering if the child had really seen Mossy, or if the one watching the road was someone older, someone remembering. That night Bobby came, not alone. He brought the man from the diner, and a woman with a camera slung over her shoulder. They didn't park far, didn't hide their approach. They stood at the edge of the yard like they were waiting for an invite. Dana stepped out, jacket zipped, arms crossed. Bobby lifted a hand in greeting, too casual to be polite. "Just dropping by," he said. "Heard some sounds last night." "I didn't," Dana replied. The woman raised her camera. "Mind if we ask a few questions? Off the record." Dana didn't answer. Bobby took a step forward. "Look, Dana, you've been out here a long time. You know these woods better than anyone. If something's out there, something real, don't you think people should know?" She stared at him and said nothing. He waited, then nodded slowly, like he was confirming something in his head. The woman pulled out a folded paper, an old map of the area. She pointed at a red X scrawled near Hollow Branch. "Ever hike out this far?" Dana's voice was steady. "No." "You ever seen strange symbols, carvings, heard anything unusual?" "No." They stood there, letting the silence fill every crack it could find. Finally, Bobby stepped back. "Well," he said, almost laughing, "you always were a tough nut." They left, but not before the woman turned and snapped a single photo of the clearing behind the cabin. No words, just the sound of the shutter. Dana watched them disappear. That night she sat by the window, radio off, lamp unlit. She didn't cry, she didn't rage, she just waited. And around midnight, a sound came, soft, distant, a slow, heavy step, one, then another, and then silence. She stepped outside barefoot, feet cold against the porch. There was nothing in the clearing, but the air was different, thicker, and she knew, without seeing, that someone had come. Not to talk, not to warn, just to make sure she was still safe. She sat on the steps until the sky began to pale, until the birds came back, until the frost melted from the pine needles. And when she finally went inside, she whispered a single promise to the empty room. "I won't let them have you. Not in pictures, not in stories. Some things don't belong to us, and some truths die the moment we name them." By the time the first snow came, the holler behind Dana's cabin had gone still. Not silent, nothing in those woods ever truly was, but still, like it was waiting for something. The deer didn't wander past the porch anymore. The birds had left earlier than usual. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath between the trees, and Dana felt it, deep in her bones. The same way old dogs know when a storm's coming. Something had changed. She moved slower now. Not from age, but from caution. Every step into the woods was a question. Every turn in the path felt like the edge of a memory she hadn't lived yet. Mossy hadn't returned in nearly 2 weeks. No knocks, no bark carvings, no soft gifts left by the mossy stump. And she hadn't dared go back to the stone altar, not after the men came snooping, not after someone tried her door in the night. She didn't need to see their faces. She knew the kind of hunger they had, the kind that didn't growl but whispered, the kind that could turn magic into merchandise. So she waited, and the woods waited with her. Then one night the sound came back. It wasn't loud. Just 3 soft knocks, spaced wide apart, on the back wall of the cabin, low to the ground, almost careful. Dana sat up in bed so fast her heart skipped. She didn't rush to the door. Instead, she closed her eyes and breathed in. Deep, slow. The scent was there. That strange, earthy mix of cedar and wet stone and something older, like the inside of a hollow tree after rain. She opened the door. Nothing. Not at first. Then, off to the left near the tree line, she saw a shape. Not moving, just waiting. Half shadow, half memory. Mossy. His eyes caught the porch light and shimmered like wet quartz. But something was wrong. He was thinner. His shoulders looked lower, his fur streaked with bits of bark and dried mud. And his arms. One hung strange, like it had been injured. But the worst part was his face. He looked afraid. Not of her, of something behind him. Dana didn't speak. She just stepped off the porch, snow crunching under her bare feet, and moved toward him like someone in a dream. Mossy didn't retreat. He stood his ground until she was close enough to see the red around his eyes, the trembling in his chest. Then, slowly, he raised one hand. In it, a piece of cloth, ripped, dirty, familiar. It was Riley's jacket. Dana's knees buckled, and for a moment, all she could see was the little girl on the porch, holding that tin of peach biscuits like a secret. "Where?" she whispered. Mossy turned, looked into the forest, then back at her, and started walking. Dana didn't hesitate. She grabbed the coat from the porch on her way past and followed him into the trees. No flashlight, no weapon, just trust. And a mother's fear. The trail was narrow, covered in a thin sheet of snow that barely crunched. Mossy moved ahead of her, slower than usual, limping slightly. Dana tried to memorize every turn, every branch, but soon the forest swallowed direction. They weren't headed toward the altar. They were going deeper, much deeper. And then she heard it. Crying, faint but real, a child's cry. Dana broke into a run, branches scraping her cheeks, her breath like knives in her chest. Mossy grunted behind her, tried to keep pace, but she was faster now, fueled by something ancient, something that didn't care about fear. She found Riley in a shallow ravine, curled up beneath a rotting log. Her hands were scratched. Her lip was bleeding. Her eyes were wild with panic. Dana dropped to her knees. "Oh, baby. Oh, my God." Riley clung to her like a lifeline, sobbing into her coat, trying to speak between gasps. "He chased me," she cried. I ran. I thought I could hide. He was yelling. He had a gun." Dana felt her stomach drop. Not a bear, not a Bigfoot, a man, someone from the diner. Maybe Bobby, maybe worse. She looked up, and Mossy was gone. No, moving. He was standing on the ridge above, eyes fixed to the north, chest heaving like a furnace. Dana could feel the growl rumbling from him even from this distance. And then, a gunshot. Sharp, close. The bark near her shoulder exploded in splinters. "Get away from her!" A man's voice, slurred, angry, close. Dana threw herself over Riley, heart pounding, as another shot rang out above them. But this time, it didn't hit bark. It didn't hit anything. Because Mossy moved like thunder. Dana didn't see the whole thing, only the blur. One moment the shooter was shouting. The next, there was silence. And when she dared lift her head again, the snow was falling harder. And the man was gone. Not dead, but gone. She could hear his panicked footsteps, crashing through the woods, fading fast. Mossy returned, limping badly now, something bleeding along his ribs. Dana reached out without thinking. He let her touch his arm, the first time she'd ever made contact. His fur was thick, matted with blood. But underneath, warmth, muscle, life, and a tremble. He was scared, not of death, of losing them. Dana looked at him, looked at Riley, and then made a choice. They couldn't stay. Not here, not anymore. She led them back toward the cabin, half carrying Riley, glancing over her shoulder every few steps. Mossy followed close, limping, bleeding, quiet. By the time they reached the porch, it was nearly dawn. The sky had turned that deep steel blue that comes just before light. Dinah didn't bother with the front door. She led them around back, through the cellar. The cabin wasn't big, but it was safe. And for now, that had to be enough. She laid Riley on the couch, wrapped her in every blanket she owned, and turned to Mossy. He was crouched in the corner trying to stay small, as if he knew he didn't belong in this world. Dinah knelt before him. "Let me help." He didn't move, so she did it anyway. Cleaned the wound, wrapped it in gauze, whispered the kind of things you only say when you know no one will understand them but the one who doesn't speak your language. And still, he stayed. Daylight came slow, the kind of light that feels more like fog than warmth. Riley slept. Dana sat by the window, watching the trail, and Mossy, he stayed near the back wall, breathing steady, eyes never leaving the tree line. Until the third knock came. 3 soft thuds, not at the door, but on the far window. Dana stood, heart sinking. Mossy rose too, and what she saw next would stay with her forever. Outside, at the edge of the woods, stood a line of them. 5, maybe 6, different sizes, all still, all watching. One of them, taller than the rest, held something in his hand, a branch bent into a loop, a symbol. Dana stepped out, barefoot again, into the snow. She didn't need to ask. They'd come to say goodbye, or to take Mossy home. But he didn't move. He stayed on the porch, watching them. And then one of them nodded, a slow, solemn bow, and they vanished into the trees, like fog at sunrise. Mossy turned to her, eyes wet. She didn't say a word, just opened the door. He stepped inside, and stayed. That night, Dana wrote a letter. Not to anyone in particular, just to time, to memory. She tucked it beneath the floorboard, beside her father's old hunting knife and her mother's locket. It read, "They tried to turn him into a story, a headline, a sighting, but he is not a thing to be seen. He is a soul to be trusted, and I will not give him to the world." She never mailed it, but somehow she knew it would be read. Years later, when the snows came again and the cabin sat empty, someone found it. A girl, maybe, or a ranger, or someone just tired of the noise. They said they found prints leading away from the cabin, 2 sets, one human, one larger, both side by side. And then, nothing, just trees, and wind, and the kind of silence that keeps its own secrets, forever. In the end, what lingers is not the thunder of footsteps in the forest, nor the fleeting echoes of laughter and tears. It is the quiet bond that weaves through every act of compassion, reminding us that kindness does not belong to any single creature or person, but to the delicate balance we share with all living things. When we choose to heal instead of harm, to listen instead of demanding answers, we reveal the deepest truths of our humanity, our capacity for empathy, our willingness to protect the vulnerable, and our understanding that every presence has worth beyond words or labels. Life will always present us with storms, both seen and unseen, that test our resolve. Yet within those storms, there is an invitation to step forward with an open heart, to honor the unspoken needs of another, and to trust in the possibility of connection even where logic finds no path. In these moments, we transcend fear and claim the noblest part of ourselves, the part that says, "You are not alone." If there is meaning to be found at the edge of mystery, it is this, that the greatest adventures are not measured by distance traveled or obstacles overcome, but by the bridges we build between hearts. Every gesture of care, every silent vigil in the dark, and every selfless offering of sanctuary becomes a testament to our shared story. And when we remember that, we recognize that the world holds room for miracles, quiet, wild, and profoundly transformative. May we carry forward the memory of those unspoken encounters, the gifts left only to be discovered by a willing soul, and the reminders that sometimes the most powerful voices are not heard but felt. Let us open our eyes to the wonders that surround us, both in the heart of the wilderness and in the pulse of our own communities. May we continue to honor the promise that every life, no matter how hidden or unlikely, is worthy of dignity, respect, and the simple grace of being seen. Thank you for joining on this journey into the depths of empathy and wonder. If this story moved you, if it awakened something in your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below. They illuminate the path for others who seek connection and hope. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an invitation to explore more tales that celebrate the human spirit and the extraordinary bonds we forge with the world around us. Your voice matters, and together we'll keep the conversation alive.